He will be a man. Middle-aged. Foreign-born. Roman Catholic. Single. Lives with a brother or sister. When you find him, he will be wearing a buttoned double-breasted suit. Asterisk. In 1956, a psychiatrist named Dr. James Brussel wrote these words about a terrorist who'd been bombing New York City for 16 years. The police thought he was crazy. How could anyone possibly know these details about a criminal they'd never met? But when they finally caught the bomber, he matched the description perfectly. Down to the double-breasted suit, which he carefully buttoned before police took him away. This is the story of how one case, one psychiatrist, and one mad bomber created the science of criminal profiling and changed the way we catch killers forever. November 16, 1940. Consolidated Edison Company, New York City. A worker discovers a strange device on a windowsill, a piece of pipe wrapped in a note. The note reads, "Con Edison crooks, this is for you." The device doesn't explode. It's crudely made, almost like a warning shot. But it's just the beginning. Over the next 16 years, this bomber would plant over 30 devices across New York City. He'd terrorize millions. He'd injure 15 people. And he'd leave the NYPD completely stumped. They had no suspects. No witnesses. No leads. Just a madman leaving bombs in movie theaters, train stations, libraries, and office buildings, along with bizarre letters signed FP. But this case would do something extraordinary. It would force law enforcement to think differently about catching criminals. It would birth a completely new investigative technique that's now used by every major police force on Earth. This is the story of the Mad Bomber of New York, and how one psychiatrist's radical idea revolutionized criminal investigation forever. By the end of this video, you'll understand how criminal profiling works, why it's both brilliant and controversial, and how this single case laid the foundation for catching serial killers, terrorists, and predators for the next 70 years. This is the case that changed everything. The first unexploded bomb in November 1940 was almost dismissed as a prank. Con Edison, the power company serving New York, received thousands of complaints. Disgruntled customers were common. But this was different. 3 months later, in September 1941, another device was found. This time on 19th Street, just lying on the street. Again, it didn't explode. Again, a note. "Con Edison crooks, this is for you." Police examined both devices. They were pipe bombs, carefully constructed but deliberately designed not to detonate. The bomber was sending a message, not trying to kill. Not yet. But then something strange happened. The bombs stopped. For nearly a decade, nothing. No bombs. No letters. Silence. The NYPD assumed the bomber had moved away, been arrested for something else, or simply given up. The case went cold. But they were wrong. March 1950. Grand Central Terminal. A bomb is found in a telephone booth. This time, it's live. It explodes, but miraculously, no one is injured. The bomber is back. And he's escalating. Over the next year, bombs appear at the New York Public Library, at Grand Central again, at the Paramount Theater. These aren't duds anymore. They're real, dangerous explosives packed with gunpowder. And then, something that would become the bomber's signature. He starts leaving bombs in movie theaters. Think about that. In the 1950s, movie theaters were packed. Families, couples on dates, children at Saturday matinees. The bomber would carefully cut into the upholstery of seats, usually in men's restrooms or in the seats themselves, and hide his devices inside. People would sit down. The bomb would detonate beneath them. On December 2, 1952, a bomb exploded at the Paramount Theater in Brooklyn. A man was injured, his leg torn apart by shrapnel. The city was terrified. Where would he strike next? A school? A church? How do you protect every public space in New York City? But the bomber wasn't just planting explosives. He was communicating. He sent letters to newspapers, to Con Edison, to the police. They were typed on a manual typewriter, always in neat, careful formatting. And they were bizarre. I will bring the Con Edison to justice. They will pay for their dastardly deeds. FP. My days on earth are numbered. Most of my adult life has been spent in bed. Police have never been near me. FP. Who was FP? What did Con Edison do to him? The letters revealed fragments of a story. The bomber claimed he'd been injured while working for Con Edison. He said they refused to compensate him. He said they destroyed his life. He said he would make them pay. But Con Edison had thousands of employees over the decades. Searching through records for someone with the initials FP who'd been injured led nowhere. The NYPD was drowning in dead ends. By 1954, the bombs were getting more sophisticated and more frequent. The bomber was learning, improving his craft. November 1954, bomb in a phone booth at Pennsylvania Station. December 1954, bomb at Radio City Music Hall, hidden in a seat cushion. March 1955, another bomb at the Paramount Theater. Then came December 2, 1956. The worst attack yet. Brooklyn Paramount Theater. Evening show. The theater is packed with over 1,500 people watching a movie. Suddenly, an explosion rips through the lower level. Shrapnel flies. People scream. Panic erupts. 6 people are injured, some seriously. One man, Abe Isaacson, suffers severe leg injuries. This was no longer just property damage. The mad bomber was maiming people. The city was in a panic. Parents kept children home. Theater attendance dropped by 30%. Every time someone sat in a movie theater, they wondered, is this the seat? Is this the bomb? The pressure on the NYPD was enormous. The mayor demanded answers. The newspapers screamed for justice. But the police had nothing. No witnesses. No physical evidence that led anywhere. No suspects. They'd investigated hundreds of leads. Interrogated dozens of people. Searched Con Edison records endlessly. Nothing worked. That's when NYPD Inspector Howard Finney made a desperate decision. He would try something that had never been done before in American law enforcement. He would ask a psychiatrist to create a psychological portrait of the bomber. He would ask Dr. James Brussel to look inside the mind of a madman. Dr. James Brussel was not your typical psychiatrist. He was a criminologist, a pioneer in forensic psychiatry, and frankly, a bit of an eccentric genius. He worked as Assistant Commissioner of Mental Hygiene for New York State, which meant he'd examine thousands of mentally disturbed individuals, including violent criminals. He understood the criminal mind in ways most psychiatrists didn't. But even Brussel had never done what the police were asking. They wanted him to tell them who the bomber was without ever meeting him. Using only the evidence, the bombs, the letters, the patterns. It seemed impossible. When Inspector Finney spread the case files across Brussel's desk in December 1956, the psychiatrist studied them carefully. Bomb fragments. Letters. Photos of devices. The locations of attacks. And then he began to speak. What Dr. Brussel did next would change criminal investigation forever. He applied principles of psychiatry, psychology, sociology, and intuition to build a portrait of the bomber. Here's what he concluded. 1. Male. Bombers are almost always male, Brussel said. This kind of rage, this need to assert power through violence, is predominantly masculine. 2. Middle-aged, 40 to 50 years old. The bombing started in 1940 and resumed in 1950. If he was a Con Edison employee injured on the job, he'd have been an adult then. That puts him in middle age now. His letters show a mature, methodical mind, not a young man's impulsiveness. 3. Foreign-born, likely Slavic. Brussel noticed the bomber's letters contained unusual phrasing, formal, stilted English that suggested a non-native speaker. The bomber's meticulous, craftsman-like construction of bombs suggested European training. My guess is he's from Eastern Europe. Poland, perhaps. Or Czech. 4. Roman Catholic. Slavic immigrants to New York were predominantly Catholic. His letters have a moral, almost religious tone. He sees himself as righteous, delivering justice. 5. Unmarried, lives with a sibling. This level of obsession, carried over 16 years, leaves no room for a wife or family. But he's clearly not isolated. His letters are coherent, not the ravings of a hermit. He lives with someone. Probably an older sister or brother who takes care of him. 6. Paranoid personality. His letters show classic paranoia. The world is against him. Con Edison is evil. He's the victim. Everyone is a crook or dastardly. This is textbook paranoid ideation. 7. Suffered from a workplace injury, likely to the lungs. The bomber's letters mention being bedridden, spending most of my adult life in bed. Brussel theorized a respiratory illness, perhaps from inhaling gases or smoke during an industrial accident. 8. Lives in Connecticut, likely Bridgeport or Waterbury. Brussel looked at the postmarks on the letters. Many were mailed from areas accessible to Connecticut. Bridgeport and Waterbury had large Slavic immigrant communities and were hubs for industrial workers who might have worked at Con Edison facilities. 9. Skills with tools and metalwork. The bombs were expertly crafted. This wasn't an amateur. The bomber had professional training as a mechanic, electrician, or machinist. But then, Brussel said something that seemed absurd. 10. When you catch him, he'll be wearing a double-breasted suit. Buttoned. The police stared at him. How could you possibly know that? Brussel smiled. Because he's obsessively neat. His bombs are perfectly constructed. His letters are meticulously formatted. Every detail is controlled. He lives an orderly, symmetrical life. And in his mind, symmetry is everything. A double-breasted suit is symmetrical. It buttons in the center. For a man with his psychology, it's the only proper way to dress. When you arrest him, he'll want to look dignified, presentable, in control. He'll button the suit. The police were skeptical. But they had nothing else. Brussel told them to publish the profile in the newspapers. Provoke him, he said. Let him know you're inside his head. He's narcissistic. He'll respond. In December 1956, the New York Journal-American published Dr. Brussel's profile. The headline: Police Shrink Reveals Mad Bomber's Portrait. The article detailed the entire profile. Male. Middle-aged. Slavic. Lives with a sibling. Wears a double-breasted suit. The city was fascinated. Was this real science or elaborate guesswork? But more importantly, would the bomber respond? The bomber reacts. Dr. Brussel was right. The bomber couldn't resist. Within days, a letter arrived at the Journal American. I read your story. You are getting close. But Con Edison must pay. They wronged me. They ignored me. They must face justice. FP. The bomber was watching. He was reading about himself. And his ego was engaged. But the letter also contained something new, more details about his injury. He wrote that he'd been injured on September 5, 1931, at a Con Edison plant. He'd been knocked down by a backdraft of hot gases. He developed a chronic illness. Con Edison denied his compensation claim. Finally, a specific date. A specific incident. Con Edison's personnel department swung into action. They pulled records from September 1931. There were thousands of files. Injury reports. Compensation claims. Employment records. It was like searching for a needle in a haystack. But a clerk named Alice Kelly took on the task. For weeks, she combed through dusty files in the basement archives. And then, she found it. A worker who'd been injured on September 5, 1931, at the Hellgate generating plant. A worker who'd filed a compensation claim and been denied. A worker who'd written angry letters to the company for years, calling them dastardly and crooks. His name, George Metesky. Alice Kelly looked at the initials of his complaint category. Fair play. FP. On January 21, 1957, police surrounded a modest house at 17 4th Street in Waterbury, Connecticut. They knocked on the door. A woman answered, George Metesky's older sister, May. Is George home? He was upstairs. Police found George Metesky in his bedroom, sitting calmly. He was 53 years old. He was foreign-born. His parents had immigrated from Poland. He was unmarried and lived with his two older sisters. When police told him he was under arrest for the bombings, Metesky didn't resist. He simply asked if he could get dressed. He went to his closet and pulled out a suit. A double-breasted suit. He carefully buttoned it, every button fastened symmetrically, just as Dr. Brussel had predicted. Police searched the house. In the garage, they found a workshop filled with tools, pipes, and bomb-making materials. In his bedroom, they found the typewriter used to write the letters. George Metesky confessed immediately. He seemed almost relieved. I did it because Con Edison wronged me, he said calmly. They refused to compensate me for my injury. They ignored my letters. They left me to suffer. I wanted justice. When police informed Dr. Brussel of the arrest, he was stunned by the accuracy of his own profile. White heavy checkmark male, correct. White heavy checkmark middle-aged, 53 correct. White heavy checkmark foreign-born, Slavic, Polish correct. White heavy checkmark Roman Catholic, correct. White heavy checkmark unmarried, lived with siblings, 2 sisters correct. White heavy checkmark workplace injury, backdraft of gases, lung issues correct. White heavy checkmark lives in Connecticut, Waterbury correct. White heavy checkmark skilled with tools, mechanic correct. White heavy checkmark wearing a double-breasted suit, buttoned correct. Nearly every detail matched. The press went wild. Psychiatrist predicts bomber's description, and he's right, screamed the headlines. But how? How did Brussel know? What is criminal profiling? Dr. Brussel's success with the Mad Bomber case introduced the world to criminal profiling, the practice of analyzing crime scene evidence, behavioral patterns, and psychological indicators to predict characteristics of an unknown offender. But it wasn't magic. It was a combination of 1. Behavioral psychology. Understanding how mental illness manifests in behavior. Metesky's paranoia, obsession, and need for control were textbook traits. These traits shaped his actions. 2. Sociology and demographics. Knowing the demographics of New York's immigrant communities, employment patterns, and cultural norms helped Brussel narrow down the bomber's likely background. 3. Forensic analysis. Examining the physical evidence, the construction of the bombs, the handwriting, the language and letters, revealed clues about the bomber's skills, education, and mindset. 4. Inductive reasoning. Taking specific behaviors and working backward to infer personality traits, lifestyle, and probable identity. 5. A bit of intuition. Brussel admitted the double-breasted suit detail was partially intuitive, a psychological hunch based on Metesky's obsessive need for symmetry and order. The success of the Mad Bomber case didn't go unnoticed. In 1970, the FBI formally launched the Behavioral Science Unit, BSU, at Quantico, Virginia. Their mission: apply psychological principles to criminal investigations. Agents like John Douglas, Robert Ressler, and Roy Hazelwood pioneered modern profiling. They studied hundreds of violent criminals, serial killers, rapists, bombers, interviewing them in prison to understand their psychology. They developed classifications: organized versus disorganized offenders, organized planned crimes, controlled behavior, above-average intelligence, socially competent, e.g., Ted Bundy. Disorganized, impulsive crimes, chaotic scenes, below-average intelligence, socially isolated. Signature versus modus operandi. MO, how the crime is committed, practical, can change. Signature, why the crime is committed, psychological, stays consistent. They created profiles that help catch. Richard Chase, the Vampire of Sacramento profile predicted disorganized schizophrenic living alone. Wayne Williams, Atlanta child murders profile narrowed suspect pool dramatically. The Unabomber, Ted Kaczynski linguistic analysis of his manifesto helped identify him. All of this traced back to Dr. Brussel and George Metesky. How profiling works today. Modern profiling uses. 1. Crime scene analysis. What type of crime? How was it committed? Organized or chaotic? Evidence of planning or impulsivity? 2. Victimology. Who was targeted? Why? Random or specific selection? Relationship between offender and victim? 3. Geographic profiling. Where did crimes occur? Does location reveal where offender lives/works? Pattern of movement? 4. Behavioral evidence. Pre-crime behavior, stalking, planning. During crime behavior, controlled versus frenzied. Post-crime behavior, covering tracks, returning to scene. 5. Linguistic analysis. Letters, emails, manifestos. Word choice, grammar, education level. Psychological indicators in language. 6. Psychological assessment. Mental illness indicators. Personality traits. Motivations, anger, power, sexual gratification. All of this comes together to create a profile. Male, 25 to 35, high school education, works night shift, lives alone, owns a van, etc. But profiling isn't perfect. It has serious critics. Issue 1. Confirmation bias. Sometimes investigators see what they expect to see. A profile says, white male, 30s, so they focus only on suspects matching that description and miss the real culprit. Issue 2. Lack of scientific rigor. Profiling is as much art as science. There's no formula. Two profilers can look at the same evidence and reach different conclusions. Issue 3. overgeneralization. Profiles are based on statistical probabilities and past cases. But every criminal is unique. Stereotypes can be misleading. Issue 4. False confidence. A profile can give investigators false confidence, leading them down the wrong path. In some cases, profiles have been completely wrong. Example: the Beltway Snipers, 2002. Profilers predicted: white male, 30s to 40s, works alone, lives in the area, drives a white van. Reality: two black men, ages 41 and 17, working together, driving a blue Chevy Caprice. The profile was completely wrong, and it delayed the investigation. Despite these issues, profiling remains a valuable tool when used carefully, in combination with traditional detective work and forensic evidence. George Metesky was charged with multiple counts of attempted murder, illegal possession of explosives, and malicious destruction of property. But he never stood trial. In April 1957, a judge ruled that Metesky was mentally unfit to stand trial. He was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, a severe mental illness characterized by delusions, persecution complexes, and detachment from reality. Metesky believed Con Edison had conspired to destroy his life. He believed his bombings were righteous acts of justice. He showed no remorse, only a calm certainty that he'd done the right thing. The court committed him to Mattawan State Hospital for the criminally insane, where he would remain indefinitely. Metesky spent the next 16 years in the psychiatric hospital. During that time, he remained cooperative, polite, and utterly convinced of his own righteousness. Doctors who examined him noted his intelligence, his meticulous nature, and his complete inability to see his actions as wrong. "I harmed no one intentionally," he insisted. "I only wanted Con Edison to acknowledge what they did to me." Of course, this wasn't true. 15 people had been injured. Thousands had been terrorized. Entire families avoided public spaces out of fear. But in Metesky's mind, he was the victim. In 1973, after a legal review, George Metesky was released from Mattawan. The courts determined he was no longer a danger to society. He returned to Waterbury, Connecticut, to live with his sister May at the same house where he'd been arrested 16 years earlier. He lived quietly, rarely leaving home. Neighbors described him as polite but odd, a relic of another era. On May 23, 1994, George Metesky died in his home at the age of 90. He'd outlived most of the people he'd terrorized, most of the investigators who'd caught him, and even Dr. James Brussel himself. To the end, Metesky never fully accepted that what he'd done was wrong. He saw himself as a man who'd been wronged and had sought justice the only way he knew how. Dr. James Brussel died in 1982, but his legacy lives on in every criminal profile ever created. His work on the Mad Bomber case proved that understanding the psychology of a criminal could be just as important as fingerprints or eyewitness testimony. He showed that behavior reveals identity, that how a person commits a crime tells you who they are. Without Dr. Brussel, there would be no behavioral analysis unit at the FBI. No criminal minds. No profilers helping solve the most complex and disturbing cases. Every time a profiler helps catch a serial killer, every time behavioral analysis narrows a suspect pool, every time psychological insight cracks a cold case, that's Dr. Brussel's legacy. What this case taught us. Lesson 1. Psychology is a tool. Before this case, police relied almost entirely on physical evidence and witness testimony. The idea that you could deduce a criminal's identity from their behavior was radical. Now, it's standard practice. Lesson 2. Patterns reveal identity. The way a person commits a crime is like a fingerprint. Their choices, their methods, their rituals, all of it reveals who they are. George Metesky's meticulous bomb construction, his formal letters, his choice of targets, all of it painted a picture of his mind. Lesson 3: Mental Illness and Crime. Metesky wasn't evil in the traditional sense. He was mentally ill. Understanding the intersection of mental illness and criminal behavior is crucial to both solving crimes and preventing them. Lesson 4: The Power of Publicity. Dr. Brussel's decision to publish the profile was brilliant. It provoked Metesky into responding, which provided the crucial detail, the injury date, that led to his capture. Sometimes, psychological warfare is as effective as physical investigation. Lesson 5: No single method is enough. Profiling didn't catch George Metesky by itself. It was profiling plus traditional detective work plus records research plus a bit of luck, Alice Kelly's diligence. The best investigations use every tool available. Today, criminal profiling is used in 1. Serial killer cases. Identifying patterns across multiple victims. Predicting when the killer will strike next. Narrowing suspect pools. 2. Terrorism investigations. Understanding radicalization pathways. Identifying behavioral indicators of potential attackers. Analyzing manifestos and communications. 3. Cold cases. Re-examining old evidence with new psychological insights. Generating fresh leads in dormant investigations. 4. Threat assessment. Evaluating school shooters, workplace violence threats. Identifying warning signs before violence occurs. 5. Kidnapping cases. Understanding abductor psychology. Negotiation strategies based on profile. 6. Cybercrimes. Analyzing online behavior. Linguistic profiling of hackers/predators. Technology is revolutionizing profiling. AI and machine learning. Algorithms can now analyze thousands of cases to identify patterns human profilers might miss. Neuroimaging. Brain scans can reveal differences in psychopaths' brains, potentially predicting violent behavior. Linguistic analysis software. Programs can analyze written communications for psychological markers with incredible accuracy. Geographic Information Systems, GIS. Advanced mapping software predicts where serial offenders live based on crime locations. But the core principle remains the same: behavior reveals identity. George Metesky planted his first bomb in 1940. He terrorized New York City for 16 years. He injured 15 people and traumatized millions. But he also, inadvertently, revolutionized criminal investigation. Because one psychiatrist looked at the evidence and said, "I can tell you who this man is before you ever meet him." And he was right. Dr. James Brussel's profile of the Mad Bomber proved that understanding the criminal mind could be just as powerful as understanding the crime itself. Today, every time the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit helps catch a killer, every time a profiler narrows down a suspect pool, every time psychological insight breaks a case wide open, we're seeing the legacy of this case. The Mad Bomber case changed forensic investigation forever. It showed us that criminals leave psychological fingerprints just as distinct as physical ones. George Metesky wanted to be remembered. He wanted Con Edison to acknowledge him. He wanted justice. He got his wish, but not the way he imagined. He's remembered not as a crusader for justice, but as the man whose crimes gave birth to an entirely new science. And that science has caught hundreds of killers, saved countless lives, and made the world a safer place. So here's the final irony: George Metesky's legacy isn't terror. It's justice. Because the case that changed everything wasn't just about catching one bomber. It was about learning how to catch all the others. Asterisk, what case should I cover next? Let me know in the comments below. And if you found this fascinating, hit subscribe, because we're diving deep into the cases that changed criminal investigation forever. Asterisk. Thanks for watching. Stay curious. And remember, behavior always reveals identity.